Now, President Bola Ahmed Tinubu's 2025 Democracy Day speech highlighted key economic gains under his administration, including 3.4% GDP growth in 2024, stabilizing inflation and the naira, and a five-fold rise in foreign reserves. Well, joining me to break down these economic achievements and examine what they mean for the average Nigerian is economic and investment analyst, Dr. Niyi Akinsi. Thanks for joining us, Doc.
Thanks so much for having me.
Good. President Tinubu reported a 3.4% GDP growth in 2024 and 4.6% in Q4, the highest in over a decade. How significant are these GDP growth figures in the context of Nigeria's economic recovery, and what factors do you think drove this performance?
Well, I think the first thing is to commend the administration of President Bola Ahmed Tinubu, because when you also contextualize these figures that you have rolled out, 4.6% growth in Q4 2024 and 3.4% growth in aggregate growth in 2024. What that tells us that in a year of policy reforms, conceptualization, implementation of policy reforms, and you have that kind of growth, it tells us that there had been a good re-engineering of the economic space. And especially when you also consider the fact that it's actually a restructuring of the policy reforms are targeted at restructuring the economy. You understand first the context of transition. Transitions are usually disruptive, and that most times you don't even expect any form of growth when an economy is in transition. But I think in a positive way, we have seen the application of reforms here, and that we are also seeing at the outcome of the reforms showing positivity in the GDP. It is established by this figure that the macroeconomic space is stabilized or stabilizing. And if you look at the macroeconomic indicators, either at the level of the GDP or at the level of inflation rate, or at the level of trade surplus, balance of payments, and even net, and it's important we differentiate this, the gross foreign reserve and the net foreign reserve. At 2023, the net foreign reserve for Nigeria's net foreign reserve was a low of 3.99 billion, very low. Yes, the gross reserve was around between 30 and 33 billion dollars. But the truth is that you also have inherent in that foreign reserve a number of forward contracts and of course other commitments, that are parts of that foreign reserve calculation. But by 2024, we're talking of a net reserve of $23 billion. It tells of a quantum leap, from that low of 3.9 billion that could merely cover a 4 months import period to 23 point something billion dollars that could cover near 10 months imports, either for goods, merchants, and services, period. So these are indication of clear successes, positive implication, positive application of resources, and of course, good, impressive results, outcomes of the reforms.
Yeah, the president also mentioned in that broadcast that inflation is gradually easing, especially on food items like rice and beans. How effective do you think the government's policies have been in tackling inflation? And what more needs to be done to ensure affordable food and essentials for the average household?
If you do a study of the policies, measures, and other forms of engagement that the government had conducted in the agricultural sector, for some of us, it's very, very impressive. Up to date, I personally counted up to 15 policies, of different kind. Of course, including Perhaps most popular is the free entry allowed certain forms of food items, rice, wheat, and such others. You could also, of course, measure it by the fact that as 2024, I think even 2024 November, food inflation was a high of I think 28%. But now we're talking of going down to 21%, 21.26%. So it tells us, effectively that some of these measures are working. Yes, more needs to be done because the food basket component of the inflation basket is perhaps the largest, is considered to be the largest by component of our inflation basket. But I am believing that with the policies, either at the level of the Bank of Agriculture, the capitalization of Bank of Agriculture with more than 1.5 trillion naira. It's also very historic. What that tells us that there's going to be an organic funding of the agricultural sector by the government. I also see a number of foreign investors coming in, the JIB from Brazil, committing about $2.something billion in the agricultural sector, especially in the livestock sector. And you also see a new form of engagement with another agency, directly linking up with the subsistence farmers. So there are so many policies in place that I think by the time we aggregate all this in the next few months, I can assure that there will be some kind of redemption, huge redemption in the agricultural sector.
That's great. The president also mentioned a 5-fold increase in foreign reserves and a stabilized naira. It feels like a win after years of currency volatility. But can we expect long-term stability in the exchange rate, especially given global oil price volatility?
Well, you just also told us about the sudden surge in crude oil pricing. As a result of the Israeli attack on Iran. Those geopolitical factors usually drive the price of crude oil, and either we like it or not, the earnings, our revenue from crude oil still form the bulk, of our earnings, of our foreign exchange earnings. But what we are seeing also now is a clear diversification away from just crude oil. So one, we had always benchmarked the Nigerian crude oil pricing against the Brent oil, but we also have our own peculiar products that are also perhaps earning more. They earn more pricing templates in the international market. Bonny Light, for instance, Kwa Ibo, Focados, Brass, and all that. We have these peculiar things. When, for instance, we are talking about Brent being $73 today, Bonny Light could be as near $79 or $80. So while we use that as our benchmark, organically, we also have our Brent, our crude oil products that are also commanding huge pricing in the international market. But beyond that, we are also seeing a lot of activities around the gas, the urea for fertilizers. We are seeing cocoa has returned so much in the last quarter, for instance, so that now we are not even talking about the 6-point-something billion trade balance, balance of payments and the trade, our standing in the trade import and export, in 2024. But now, even in the first quarter of 2025, we have recorded a higher trade surplus, at more than 5 trillion naira. And what excites a sovereign state than the fact that your export is lower than your import? And it also means, the implication is that either there is a constraint in import in demand, or the ones those that were using for our foreign exchange to import before have also now seen opportunities, for alternative options locally, domestically. And so to a large extent, it's a win-win situation for us.
Yeah, in that broadcast, I remember that the president noted a positive balance of payments, just like you pointed out, and improved sovereign credit ratings. How important do you think these indicators are for investor confidence and Nigeria's borrowing capacity?
The borrowing capacity, is determined mostly by ratings, by our net foreign reserve. And I was trying to explain the fact that the total outlook of a foreign reserve would be seen as gross, but the foreign direct investor, or the foreign investor as it were, would want to look at the component of that gross that are free of encumbrances. There are certain things, there are certain percentage of the foreign exchange that are actually revenues, based on loan, that were contracted based on the value or the quantity of crude oil that we have made commitment to some other jurisdiction. So the foreign direct investor, or the investor as it were, we want to look at that and look at the volume that are actually, domestic that had domestic commitment. So in 2024, in 2023, we had 3.9 billion, out of a reserve of about $28 billion. So out of that, the net, by the time you remove commitment to JP Morgan, commitment to China swap, commitment to that, you only have just about that 4 billion to the name of the Nigerian sovereign state. But 12 months thereafter, we are talking of a net reserve about 24 billion, 23 plus billion dollars. It shows a quantum leap. It shows that there have been a lot of economic activities, in the area of export, and that we have earned so much. And of course, our debt commitment had also reduced. So this breeds confidence, amongst the foreign investors, even domestic investors. And I always like to insist that while we look and we are excited by what foreign investors are doing with us, we should actually continue to nurture our domestic investors, because it is what domestic investors are doing that becomes the relatable template, for foreign investors to see how good, how enabled our economic space is, for them to, of course, to come into Nigeria and invest more.
It's interesting that states no longer need to borrow to pay salaries. That sounds like better financial management. So how have the reforms in oil and non-oil exports contributed to this fiscal stability? And what risks could derail this progress for states and the national economy at large?
It's a good thing, because pre-2024, in fact, 2022, 21, 23, we had how state governments were actually approaching commercial banks, not even development banks, not even development agencies, commercial banks to borrow money to pay salaries. And of course, the interest rates interest rate that is demanded or required of commercial bank is very, very high. So now that we have this situation of the state governments actually paying back their debts, paying down their debts. At the last figure, out of about 5.4 trillion naira debt of the states, I think about 1.86 trillion had been paid down. And it is because government made saving from the removal of fuel subsidies, from the harmonization of the foreign exchange windows. So whereas before, when we pegged our naira to dollar at 430, got to 460 at the time, the real value, of that naira was actually 1,500, 1,600, as we are, of course, transacting the purchase, I think the buying and the selling of naira now. So which means at that time, the government was actually subsidizing a dollar purchased by privileged persons because, again, it was not accessible. It was only accessible to those people who were privileged, who had nexus in the government or to the CBN at that time. So it does mean that we were actually subsidizing every dollar purchased at about 1,200 or 1,100 naira. So now, with the harmonization, what is coming to the government is the actual value, as it were. So when the government hands $1 million, rather than multiply it by 460, you multiply by 1,500 plus in the markets. And
Niyi,
of course, you get more naira to service the economy, as it were. And that's why salaries are being paid. The debts are being paid down too.
Thank you very much. Thank you very, very much, Dr. Niyi Akinsi, for sharing your thoughts on Business Express today.
Thanks so much. Pleasure is mine.
All right, moving on.